Okay, for those who would like to learn about Pesach, come Tuesday night. You all got the link on the email. We will be learning about Pesach. Tonight we're doing Parsha. This week's Parsha is Tzav. It's the second portion in Leviticus. And Tzav means command. But what's interesting is that the word itself is in the command grammatical form, because it's only two letters, Tzav. Like, it's a very strong statement. There's only two parshas that have the name of mitzvah. Tzav comes from mitzvah, to command. And one is in the book of Exodus, Tzav, where God tells Moshe to command Israel about bringing the oil for the menorah. And here we have even a stronger grammatical tense, Tzav. So Rashi says about this that the reason it's written in the command form, he says it's the language of zrizut. Zrizut means alacrity. In other words, doing something with the full force of your being and not holding back. Zrizut means like putting your whole being into it. So Rashi says it's a language of alacrity for now and for all the generations. So I just want to speak a little bit about this, but what we're going to talk about tonight is the idea of mitzvah in general. The fact that this is the only parsha that has like such strong language of tzav, the root of mitzvah. That's what we're going to be learning about. But I just want to say a little bit about when Rashi says it's the language of alacrity. So the Baal Shem Tov had a beautiful saying or a beautiful attitude about life in general. And that is, in Hebrew, it's zrizut b'metinut, which means alacrity with calmness. So I can't think of a better time of year to say this as before Pesach, when everyone is working so diligently to get out the chametz, clean the house, do the shopping, prepare spiritually for Pesach and the Seder. And so this is wonderful advice now, but really always, is to balance doing things with the full force of our being, with full intent, but calmly. Zrizut b'metinut. Once I learned this, it had a profound effect on me, because it's not easy to balance these. Sometimes we think to be calm, we can't act with alacrity. And sometimes we think to act with alacrity, we have to be a bit stressed out. But here it's a beautiful balance. And the other comment I want to make based on the Rashi is, he says, for now and for all generations. The implication is that we don't have a temple now. We do not have the temple service. And yet the foundational spiritual lessons from every mitzvah in the Torah is for now and for all generations. Meaning, of the 613 Torah mandated mitzvot, because that's what we're talking about tonight, mitzvot, I don't know the exact number, but it's around 170 is all that we do today. Now that might come as an astounding statement, but since so many of the mitzvot are dependent on the temple, the Kohanim and the Leviim doing their service of having a Sanhedrin, of having a majority of Jews in Israel. So most of the mitzvot that actually we read about, we're not actually doing. But what we're learning from this, and for those who get the email, this is a little bit of the Devar Torah that I will be sharing this week, is that the Baal Shem Tov said all of the mitzvot in the Torah, even if we're not doing them actively now, still apply to us in a spiritual, emotional, intellectual manner. All the lessons that we learn from the mitzvot are most certainly applicable today. So that's a very, very important statement. It's a hint to it, Rashi, when he says that you should command Aaron and his children to act with alacrity for now and all generations. But what I want to spend the rest of the class on today is the concept of mitzvah, because that's what the portion is named after, is to command. So the first thing, and extremely important, is we translate mitzvah as command, and that is a correct translation. But it's brought down in the Gemara that the root of the word mitzvah, tzaveh, is the language of connection. Now, this is very, very important because in the Western world today, in general, I'm not talking about the Jewish world, but in the general Western world, just the word command makes the hair on people's head stand up, because we're brought up with this idea of freedom, where I want to be in a position that no one can tell me what to do. I want to be free. I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. So the whole idea of 613 mitzvot and thousands of rabbinic laws, for someone who is not educated in this concept, it's we'll call it politically incorrect to talk about there's a commander and we are being commanded. It's much easier to accept and understand the idea that a mitzvah is a chance to connect. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go through 5 different levels of connection that a mitzvah can engender. So, and we're going to do it according to the 5 levels of the soul. It's a very, very beautiful teaching, very fundamental teaching. So anyone who has their pen, I see Susan has her pen and paper there. And I really applaud that, because to really learn Torah, we have to go over it and over it again. So the 5 levels of the soul, we're going to do it one at a time. So we'll call it the lowest level of soul is called the nefesh. And sometimes it's translated as the animal soul. This is the part of the soul that is most connected to the body. So on the level of mitzvah, almost all of the mitzvot that we have, except for really a handful, entail a physical action, a physical object, or speech. Speech is actually considered an action. So when we do a mitzvah, it connects us to the world. It connects us, and we'll see later, to time and space, and to our body. The word for a human being is Adam. And we're taught that we can put a hyphen between the 2 syllables. The Aleph of Adam is the divine soul. And the next 2 letters, Dam, equals blood. And that represents the body. So a human being is a hybrid of a divine soul with a very physical, material body. And to juggle and integrate those two realities is a work of a lifetime. So on the level of nefesh, a mitzvah helps train the body to go along with the soul in connecting to all the different levels of the soul, as we'll see, and ultimately to God. Because I'm just taking an example, to pray 3 times a day. Well, if the body was left to its own devices, let's even forget praying for right now. What about getting up for work when the alarm rings at 6:30 in the morning and you got to bed very late at night and it's snowing out and you have to buck traffic to get to work? Well, the body, if left to its own devices, would just stay in bed where it's warm and comfy. So mitzvot come to train the desires of the body, the desires of the heart. The desires of the body and the heart are not meant to be squelched, but they're meant to be channeled in the correct way. And that's what a mitzvah does. It connects us, the body, to a deeper meaning in life. The next level of soul is called Ruach. Ruach is usually translated as spirit. This is considered the emotional component of a human being. So what is the function of a mitzvah on the level of Ruach? Well, when we do mitzvot, they're not meant to be done in a cold, calculated way. They're meant to be done in a way that moves us emotionally, that it brings us joy. It connects us to the love of Judaism, the love of Torah, the love of God, the love of other people. Now remember, there's 2 types of mitzvot. Mitzvot between a person and God, and between a person and other people. So when we do mitzvot, so going back to nefesh, it connects us to the world. It connects us to other people. For example, a mitzvah of visiting the sick. So that connects us to other people. That's just one of hundreds of examples. So on the level of Ruach, again, a mitzvah connects us to our emotions, to devotion, to compassion, to awe, love, joy. And that's one of the functions of a mitzvah. We all know sometimes we can be very disconnected to our own emotions. We could have a hard time feeling joy and expressing joy. There are sometimes we have a hard time loving ourselves and loving other people. So mitzvot help connect us through these different emotions so that we can be like a whole holistic person. The next level of soul is called Neshama. The Neshama is considered the intellectual component of a human being. So just like a mitzvah connects us to our body, to the world, to our emotions, it also connects us to our intellect. How? Because we're not meant to perform the mitzvot without really understanding the deeper meanings of the mitzvah. Even though at Mount Sinai we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and then we will hear, meaning we'll do the mitzvah even if we don't understand them, even if I don't feel like it this morning. I don't really feel like getting out of bed and going to the shul and davening. But I do it because it's a mitzvah. and I know it's the right thing to do. But still, we're encouraged greatly to learn Torah in order to understand, why do we have this mitzvah? How does it affect the world? How does it affect my body? How does it affect my soul? There's an expression about prayer that we can apply to this also. The expression is tefillah b'li kavanah ke guf b'li neshama. Praying without intent is like a body without a soul. So the same thing with doing a mitzvah. We can do the mitzvah in a very mechanical manner, but just like we said about the emotions, also we need the intellect. We need to connect to, why am I doing this? How is it helping the world? How is it helping me? Why did God command these things? So that's the level of neshama. That's the connection of a mitzvah. Then we have the fourth level of soul called chaya. This is from the word chai, life. The first three levels of the soul that we talked about, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, are considered the more conscious levels of soul. The last two that we're going to speak of are the more supraconscious levels of soul. So the chaya connects us to a deeper level of soul than the ordinary consciousness that we have, like to make it in this world. Our ordinary consciousness, our ordinary emotions, our ordinary intellect. It brings us to a higher spiritual, mystical level where we connect to the source of our soul, the meaning of our life, the meaning of the mitzvot, in a way that they actually can transform us and transform the world around us. And then the highest level of soul is called yechidah. Yechidah it means unique, individual. And this is what's called the point of godliness in the soul. And about this, Chassidut explains that the divine soul is an actual part of God above. And just like our soul is a part of God above, there's a point of God in our soul. So when we do a mitzvah, here we connect to God. This is our direct connection to God. Now, there's a beautiful Kabbalistic explanation of how this works. You may have heard of this, you may have not, but in Kabbalah, but I have to say it's also mentioned in Rashi, in the Midrash, in the Talmud. It's not just Kabbalah, it is a legitimate part of our tradition. There are alternative alphabets. And one is called Atbash. What does Atbash mean? At is the letter Aleph and Taf. So you have the first letter of the alphabet and the last letter. Bash is you have the second letter of the alphabet and the second last. And it goes through the whole alphabet, where you can take one letter and exchange it for its direct opposite. This is called Atbash. So what's very interesting is if you take the last two letters of the name of the four-letter name of God, it's a Vav and a Hey. Remember, Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. If you look at the word mitzvah, so the last two letters are the same, a Vav and a Hey. Mitzvah, Mem, Sadi, Vav, Hey. Now, if you take the first two letters of mitzvah, mem and sadi, they're exchanged for the letters yud and hey. So that is like what's called a support for this idea that a mitzvah connects us directly to God. And just as important, obviously, as connecting to our body, connecting to the world, connecting to other people, to our emotions, our intellect, our higher level of soul, ultimately, we are connecting with God. So this is a beautiful teaching to really keep in mind all the time, that mitzvah means connection. And like Rashi said, that's how we started, that it's for now and for all generations. So when we do a mitzvah, we are connecting to all the people who have done mitzvot before us. An example in a different context is if someone goes to the Western Wall and feels something awesome, it doesn't happen to everyone every time, but most certainly, most people, at least a few times, have very awesome experiences at the Kotel. But if we really think about it, I think we discussed this in an earlier class, where everyone in the world turns towards Jerusalem to daven. Whether you're in the North Pole or the South Pole, you're in Australia or you're in Hawaii, everyone turns towards Jerusalem. And we're told that all prayers in the world, when they ascend, they don't ascend from where people are. They all are channeled to the place of the temple, and then they go up. This is the secret of when Yaakov had a dream of a ladder that connected heaven and earth. And after the dream, he said, this is the house of God, and this is the gate to heaven. Because he understood that this was a vortex. That's the modern term for this energy. It's a vortex of energy. So that's what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah connects us not only to the 5 levels of soul, but to our whole chain of tradition. And perhaps the time we feel this the most of the entire year is Seder night. When we sit at a Seder and we tell over the story and we go through all the steps of the Seder, there is such a strong connection to our tradition. Now, we can have this feeling anytime, truthfully, at any time. Just like you don't have to be standing at the Kotel to have an awesome experience, but it helps. It really helps. So Seder night, when actually, if you look at the Haggadah, we don't start when we're slaves in Egypt. We go all the way back to Avram. And we don't have time to go into it now, but if anyone has my book, the Haggadah Companion, we go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and we go back all the way to the soul before it even comes into the world. All this can be experienced Seder night. So now I just want to add a few beautiful ideas based on gematria. So the word Tzav, that's the name of the parsha, Sadi Vav, equals 96. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for being in the class. So it equals 96. We have a number 4 if we have time. Okay, I'll try to get to that, Brenda. I'm trying to look at the chat and talk at the same time. I think I'll wait to the chat and then finish. So it equals 96, and we have this concept in Kabbalah, in Gematria, that we can add 1 for the word. It's called the Kolel. So if you add 1 to 96, you have 97. 97 equals Zman, time. Now, if you think about it very practically, Jewish tradition and the Mitzvot are very connected to time. We have a time to light candles before Shabbos. There's a time, exact time when Shabbos begins. There's an exact earliest time where Shabbos goes out. We have a time frame to say the morning prayers. We have a time frame when we can say the Shema in the morning. We have a time frame when we can daven the afternoon prayer. We have a beginning time and an ending time. And if you really think about it, so many mitzvot are time related. And even though we can't get into it right now, but many of the women know that there are many mitzvot that women are able to do, but are not commanded to do because they're time related. This is a whole subject in itself, but it's very important to mention that for women, many of the mitzvot are either obligated or not obligated based on time. So everyone, I'll leave it to your imagination. If you think about many of the different mitzvot, Pesach is coming. Everyone will go online to find when is the last time that you can get rid of your chametz or burn your chametz. When's the last time you can eat your chametz? In other words, mitzvot are very time related. And like we said in the first level of the nefesh, it's very place related also. So that's just one insight. Now, Tzav is a command form, but the 3-letter root of the word mitzvah is tzaveh. In the verb form is tzaveh. Tzaveh equals 101. What's the significance of that? So there's an expression in the Talmud, a very important expression, is that doing a mitzvah, the context it's given over is learning. Learning something for the 101st time, there's no comparison if you only learn it 100 times. You would think, I learned 100 times already. How different can the 101st time be? Well, if you really think about it, let's take an example of someone who's brought up religious. Many of us are Bal Tshuva, but let's say already at age 5, we're reading the Chumash. We're reading Bereshit and Noach and Lech Lecha. And then when we're 99 years old, we do it again. We go through the whole cycle again. You say, well, I learned Bereshit 98 times already. What else could I learn? The truth is a world you can learn. That's the secret of Torah. There is no end to the insights. There is no end to the, what I call the 70 faces of the Torah. So the same thing with a mitzvah. We could say, I've done this, I pray every morning. How how different can it be? So the truth is that the 101st time, there's no comparison if we only do it 100 times. Now, obviously, the danger is to fall into rote and routine. And that is a challenge. But the fact that Tzav equals 101 is telling us on the surface, you can fall into rote. But if you really apply yourself, remember the first thing we learned, what Rashi said, is Tzav is the language of zrizut, of alacrity, of putting your whole being into something. So in theory and ideally, every time we do a mitzvah, we can and ideally we should put our whole being into it. Now, if Tzav equals 101, now let's add the kolel to that. If you add 1 to that, it's 102. 102 equals emunah, faith. So if you look at the whole Torah, if you look at the whole structure of mitzvot, it all depends on one thing, that I have faith that God is the one who's commanding me, us, to do the mitzvah. In other words, if I don't have the faith, the emunah, that this is God's will, and that there really is someone commanding, then I could do the mitzvot, but there's something very fundamentally missing. So the entire structure of the Torah is based on the faith that the mitzvot are being commanded to us by the creator of the universe. So I want to end with a beautiful Pesach story. I hope you'll appreciate it. And it has to do what we're talking about. The story is about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Very, very famous Hasidic rabbi, lived in the Ukraine in the early 1800s. I had the merit to one time to be by his gravesite in the Ukraine. And the story is told like this, is that Erev Pesach, after everyone has burned their chametz, gotten rid of it, he calls his shamash, his aide, and says, let me get this right. I'm going back a step. I'm sorry, I'm going back a step. Right before Pesach, he says to his aide, I need some Turkish tobacco. Now, at that time, Turkey and Russia were in a war. And in the Ukraine, to have anything Turkish was illegal. You were suspect of sedition. And the aide said, I don't know. He says, I really need some Turkish tobacco. So the aide goes out, and a few minutes later, he comes back. He said, it was no problem at all. Everyone seems to have a little bit. Okay. A few days later, it's Erev Pesach. After the time that everyone has sold their chametz, everyone has burned it, you can't have it. He calls his aide and he says, I really need some chametz. He says, Rabbi, it's after the time. There is no chametz. It's all burnt. It's all nullified. He says, I really need some chametz. So he goes out and he comes back a long time later and he said, Rabbi, there is no chametz in the entire village of Berdichev. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, he was known to do this. He ran to shul and he opened the Aron Kodesh and he said, Ribbona Sha'olam, Master of the world, do you see what just happened? It's illegal to have Turkish tobacco. I had no problem getting it with all of the police and everything. But when I asked for some chametz, there's no chametz police out there. There wasn't a speck of chametz in all of Berdichev. Do you see what a holy people you have? Do you see what a holy people you have who keep your mitzvot? It's just such a beautiful, beautiful story. So thank you all. I want to end with a bracha, and then we'll do as we always do. We'll open up for comments. I'll read the chats, etc. So may this year really be on a very practical level that we all get out of Mitzrayim. And for most of us, that means getting beyond all the restrictions from COVID on a very, very practical level. That's what it means. But obviously on a deeper level, we all have our Egypts that we need to leave. We all have our self-imposed jails that we have created around us, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. And we all need to get out of Mitzrayim. So I hope very much we can all do that this year.